Mistress framed pregnant wife for murder millionaire, only learned the truth on her deathbed. They say love and loyalty bind a marriage, but what if hidden betrayals and carefully crafted lies threaten to tear it all apart? Today, I invite you into a world where a secret mistress manipulates her way into the life of a wealthy businessman, framing his innocent, pregnant wife for murder. Deception lurks in every corner of their stately home, and truth remains locked behind carefully drawn curtains. How far will a scheming woman go to claim a billionaire's heart and fortune for herself? Stay tuned, because the shocking reality behind this twisted tale will leave you breathless and searching for answers. Alexander Cunningham was never one to crave the limelight. He was born into it. His family name, etched into the annals of high society, stood for wealth, influence, and philanthropy. Educated in prestigious institutions across Europe, Alexander returned home with a vision of expanding his family's business empire. At 32, he was charming, driven, and, some said, unstoppable. His ventures included everything from luxury, real estate, to technology investments. And though the tabloids painted him as a playboy billionaire, those who truly knew him said he was kind and sentimental, a trait inherited from his late mother, who once donated half her inheritance to build educational centers in underserved neighborhoods. It was during a charity gala at the Four Seasons Hotel in Chicago, an event he himself hosted to raise money for leukemia. Research that Alexander first laid eyes on Evelyn Hargrave. She was hardly the typical socialite. Reserved but graceful, she came to represent her father's law firm, offering pro bono legal services to children's hospitals. There was an innocence to her that drew Alexander in. She had dark hair, a gentle smile, and a warmth that made everyone around her feel safer, more at ease. When their gazes finally met, a current ran between them that no one else at the gala seemed to notice. Alexander politely introduced himself, but Evelyn hardly recognized him, having grown up in a middle-class family with little interest in tabloid gossip. Her obliviousness was refreshing to him. He was used to women who already knew his net worth and had expectations. That night, conversation flowed easily about their shared aspirations for philanthropic work. Before long, they were talking about small personal details, her childhood in a Boston suburb, his experiences studying in Paris, her passion for pro bono legal advocacy. By the end of the evening, Alexander's thoughts revolved around little else but Evelyn. A whirlwind romance followed. Over candlelit dinners in quiet, upscale restaurants, they shared stories of past heartbreaks and childhood dreams. At times, they'd take midnight strolls along the Chicago waterfront, admiring the skyline's reflection in the water. Soon, those stolen moments replaced society's usual pomp and grandeur. Even as the press clamored for exclusives, the couple kept much of their relationship private. Those close to Alexander saw a man transformed. He laughed more freely, cancelled fewer personal commitments, and spoke passionately about the future he and Evelyn would build together. After a year of growing closer, Alexander proposed in his family's ancestral estate. The location was symbolic, a rose garden planted by his mother. That day, as the sunset bathed them in shades of gold and soft purple, he knelt on one knee. Evelyn's acceptance came through joyful tears, and they sealed their promise with a tender kiss. The wedding itself was held at a quaint chapel in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood, marking not just a union of two souls, but also a testament to pure love untouched by material trappings. If only things had stayed that simple, if only fate and human jealousy hadn't conspired to disrupt their bliss. Newlyweds in a sprawling mansion, Alexander and Evelyn reveled in the early days of their marriage. The property, an expansive estate featuring manicured gardens, a stable of Arabian horses, and a staff of discreet housekeepers felt like a dream. Although grand, it was also surprisingly cozy. Evelyn had a gift for making any space feel like home. With her intuitive sense of interior design, she replaced stiff formalities with warm comfort, changing the ambience from museum-like to welcoming. Alexander's extended family admired Evelyn's gentle nature, especially his father, Gregory Cunningham, whose health was declining. He'd been a rigorous businessman with little tolerance for excuses, but Evelyn's kindness melted his stoic demeanor. Even the staff adored her for treating them like friends rather than employees. The outside world, though, saw them as a golden couple worthy of tabloids and gossip magazines. Every glitzy function they attended, every vacation they took, and every philanthropic move they made was documented and scrutinized. But beneath the veneer of perfection, cracks were forming. Alexander's wealth and responsibilities meant he traveled often, overseeing corporate expansions, negotiating high-stakes deals, and forging global partnerships. He was gone for weeks at a time, leaving Evelyn in the mansion. While the staff and her father-in-law offered companionship, the isolation and constant media attention weighed heavily. She missed the simplicity of her old life, a time when she could walk down a street without cameras. Despite her best efforts, loneliness began to eat at her. Evelyn tried to busy herself with charitable endeavors, volunteering at local shelters and children's wards, just as she had done before marriage. However, people looked at her differently now, always aware of her status as Mrs. Cunningham. She noticed that some colleagues fawned over her, others were suspicious of her intentions, and the press hounded her for superficial stories. She wanted to maintain a normal life, but found it nearly impossible within the bubble of wealth and fame. During those long nights in the estate, she'd wait by the phone for Alexander's calls or watch some late-night talk show, seeking distraction. While her feelings of longing were legitimate, Evelyn never suspected that Alexander's frequent absences would create an opening for a more sinister force to walk into their marriage. At social functions, rumor had it that Alexander's charming persona had gained him more than just business contracts. There were whispers of flirtations, unsubstantiated talk that he had entertained certain acquaintances a bit too warmly. Evelyn tended to brush aside such rumors. She trusted her husband. After all, he had promised unwavering loyalty, and every conversation they shared reminded her of how much he cared. But reality does not always align with hope, and sometimes the smallest seeds of discontent can be nurtured by jealousy and greed until they grow into a forest of deception. In this case, that seed took root in the form of a woman named Sienna Royce, a cunning opportunist who saw in Alexander Cunningham not just a chance for love, but a golden ticket to power. Sienna Royce worked as a high-level consultant at one of Alexander's affiliated companies, a marketing firm that handled promotions for his various ventures. Tall, statuesque, and brilliant in her field, Sienna was one of those people everyone seemed to notice. She commanded attention not only because of her striking features, raven black hair, emerald green eyes, but also her keen ability to read a room and manipulate its energy in her favor. She could transform a mere business pitch into an unforgettable experience with her wit and unwavering confidence. Alexander was first intrigued by her work ethic. While investigating stagnant growth in one division of his conglomerate, he consulted the marketing firm. Sienna's proposals were revolutionary. She identified untapped demographics and devised campaigns that leveraged social media trends. She seemed to predict consumer behavior before it occurred, and that prescience made her indispensable in Alexander's eyes. He praised her openly during board meetings and financed her ambitious projects. Behind that professional admiration, Sienna harbored deeper ambitions. She had grown up in modest means. Her father was a factory worker, Her mother, a seamstress. She saw wealth as the ultimate security, the ticket out of a life defined by financial struggle. The moment she stepped into the world of corporate opulence, she became determined to climb to the top. She networked relentlessly, charmed CEOs, and built an image of unstoppable success. In Alexander, she spotted more than a charismatic client. She saw the culmination of her aspirations. Their association turned personal after a particularly demanding business trip to Hong Kong. After final negotiations, Sienna invited Alexander to join her for a drink in the lounge. One drink became two, and conversation flowed from professional updates to personal anecdotes. Alexander spoke about Evelyn, but Sienna listened with an unreadable expression, carefully tucking away the details of his marriage. In that moment, she decided she would have him married or not. The actual affair began subtly. Flirty texts about marketing strategies late at night, a casual hand on his arm during business lunches, eyes lingering a second too long. Alexander, lonely and exhausted, found himself drawn to Sienna's vivacity. She seemed to understand the pressures of running a business empire in a way Evelyn, sweet as she was, could not. Soon, stolen kisses in secluded corners replaced innocuous banter. Their first real indiscretion happened during a conference in Dubai, where they ended up in a lavish hotel suite. A single night that should never have happened, but it did, and for Sienna, it was only the beginning. Yet the affair remained clandestine, at least at first. Alexander was plagued by guilt, repeatedly reminding himself that he loved Evelyn. But Sienna proved too tempting, a kind of forbidden fruit that both thrilled and disgusted him. Meanwhile, Sienna had no intention of staying a secret side piece. She wanted everything: Alexander's love, his money, and the status of being the woman on his arm in public. The mistress had arrived on the scene, and she was ready to destroy anything in her path. Ironically, amidst the swirling storm of Alexander's infidelity, a piece of joyful news arrived. Evelyn was pregnant. She had been feeling ill for weeks, morning sickness that wouldn't subside. Alexander had just returned from yet another trip, this one to Los Angeles, when she broke the news with trembling excitement. As she whispered, "We're having a baby," tears glistened in her eyes. In that instant, Alexander's heart stopped. Overwhelmed by guilt and happiness in equal measure, he drew her into a tight embrace, whispering sweet reassurances. She laughed and cried at once, a mix of relief and anticipation. For a moment, Alexander felt the weight of his deception crushing him. As word spread, excitement filled the estate. Gregory Cunningham, though weakened by age and illness, was elated at the prospect of a grandchild. Staff members eagerly offered their congratulations, and a sense of renewal took hold. Alexander promised himself he would end the affair with Sienna. This new life demanded his unwavering devotion. This child deserved nothing less, but Sienna had other plans. She found out about Evelyn's pregnancy through a slip of gossip at work. A colleague congratulated her on her boss's new family news, not realizing Sienna had any interest in Alexander's personal life. In that moment, a burning jealousy ignited within her. She cornered Alexander in his office one afternoon, demanding to know why he'd kept the pregnancy from her. He tried to explain that he intended to be a faithful husband and father, that they had to end their affair. This was all it took for Sienna's carefully masked ambition and rage to come roaring to the surface. She refused to accept his decision. She said she loved him, that she had given her best years to him professionally and personally. She refused to be cast aside now. Alexander insisted it was over, that the child changed everything. Yet Sienna simply stood there, silent, her eyes shimmering with resentment. She vowed to make him regret his choice if he dared to abandon her. Despite his own turmoil, Alexander felt a renewed sense of duty to Evelyn. He poured himself into husbandly tasks, attending doctor's appointments, helping choose the nursery decor, even scaling back his business trips so he could be present for every milestone. In the evenings, he'd soothe Evelyn through her nausea, warming soup and rubbing her back. She saw a transformation in him. He became more tender, more attentive. Unaware of the heartbreak that loomed just below the surface, Evelyn believed their marriage had entered a new, beautiful phase. Sienna, however, simmered in the background, scheming. She nurtured her anger like a twisted seed, determined to sow chaos in Alexander's life. She believed she could reclaim him, or at the very least, destroy what he had built with Evelyn. And so, in the shadows of that grand estate, as the couple prepared for the greatest joy of their lives, a plan of unspeakable malice took shape, a plan that would leave Evelyn framed for a crime she did not commit. Tension hovered thick in the air when Sienna appeared at the estate under the pretext of delivering urgent marketing reports. Evelyn, who had only a vague notion of Sienna's existence as a trusted consultant, greeted her politely. She offered tea in the sunlit parlor, genuinely curious about Sienna's role in Alexander's business. But Sienna's gaze lingered too long on the walls adorned with family portraits, and her smiles never reached her eyes. Evelyn felt uneasy, but she brushed it off as jealousy. Perhaps Sienna was envious of her marriage. She had no clue that this woman had already shared a bed with her husband. The meeting should have been strictly business. But Sienna's gaze flickered across the living room, taking in every detail from the wedding photos to the hints of Evelyn's pregnancy. She complimented the decor, commented on the estate's history, even asked how Evelyn was feeling about impending motherhood. While the conversation was outwardly polite, underlying tension vibrated like a taut wire. Later that day, Alexander came home early. He found Sienna in his office, reviewing documents and sipping from a porcelain cup. The moment he walked in, her tone shifted. She closed the distance between them and whispered so that no one else could hear, "You can't avoid me forever." Alexander stiffened, glancing nervously at the door. He managed a frigid response that they would talk later, outside of his home. Evelyn had been passing by, carrying freshly laundered linens when she caught the exchange. She didn't hear Sienna's words, but she saw the proximity, the hush in their voices, the tension in Alexander's posture. A pang of unease shot through her. After Sienna departed, Evelyn tried to ask Alexander about the nature of their conversation. He brushed it off, saying Sienna was simply upset over a failed business pitch, but the explanation felt thin. As the weeks passed, Sienna found reasons to meet with Alexander more frequently, either at the office or in random hotels under the guise of corporate retreats. He tried to resist, but Sienna always had an excuse: an urgent contract to review, a potential deal with high stakes. Each time, she cornered him with veiled threats. "If you don't see me, I might slip and tell your wife about us." Fearful of causing Evelyn distress during her pregnancy, Alexander caved to these demands, unwittingly becoming a marionette in Sienna's puppet show. For Evelyn, the atmosphere at home changed subtly. She sensed Alexander's stress, the way his eyes drifted when they were alone, as though burdened by a confession he couldn't speak aloud. She also noticed suspicious calls at odd hours. He'd walk outside to talk in hushed tones. Rather than jump to conclusions, she dismissed these red flags, telling herself he was overwhelmed by business expansions. She was carrying his child after all. Surely her beloved husband wouldn't betray her now. But betrayal had already occurred, and soon the ramifications of Alexander's choices and Sienna's vengeful machinations would become devastatingly clear. Evelyn's pregnancy reached its second trimester, and her world should have been filled with baby shopping, nursery preparations, and hopes for a bright future. Instead, she increasingly felt a suffocating unease. Alexander's anxiety only grew more pronounced. She saw it in the bags under his eyes, the restless nights where he tossed and turned. Tactfully, she asked if work was overwhelming him, even encouraging him to share the load. But each time she offered help, he demurred, reassuring her everything was under control. Behind this facade, Sienna's manipulations escalated. She began orchestrating chance encounters that ensured rumors would seep into high society. One night, Alexander, under the ruse of a business meeting, found himself alone with Sienna in a rooftop lounge. She had deliberately chosen a location frequented by gossip-hungry socialites. That same evening, a paparazzo snapped pictures of Alexander looking cornered while Sienna leaned in intimately, whispering in his ear. Within days, tabloids splashed headlines about the mystery woman in the billionaire's life. Sienna leaked just enough clues to stoke speculation, but not enough to confirm an affair. When Evelyn confronted Alexander about the photographs, he stammered through a vague explanation about client relationships. Disturbed, but still wanting to trust him, Evelyn accepted his words with a heavy heart. Yet, a seed of doubt had been planted in her mind. She wished she could talk to Gregory Cunningham for guidance, but his health had taken a turn for the worse. Confined to his room and drifting in and out of consciousness, he was in no condition for serious conversation. As family and doctors attended to Gregory, Evelyn felt more alone than ever. From her vantage point, Sienna decided it was time to set her grand plan in motion. She needed not just to tear Alexander away from Evelyn, but to ensure Evelyn was out of the picture completely. Searching for weaknesses, Sienna discovered that a longtime friend of Evelyn's, Rosalind Porter, served as the estate's occasional counsel, assisting with legal matters relating to staff and property disputes. Rosalind had visited the mansion frequently since Evelyn's pregnancy, providing emotional support. Cunningly, Sienna planned an elaborate trap. She would need a victim, a plausible motive, and a set of planted evidence linking Evelyn to murder. Rosalind Porter became the unfortunate pawn. Perhaps in Sienna's twisted logic, removing Rosalind would be a double victory. She'd eliminate a protective figure in Evelyn's life, and also create circumstances that would incriminate Evelyn beyond doubt. She arranged a secret meeting with one of her unsavory contacts, a private investigator known for forging documents and staging scandals. They discussed forging documents that suggested Rosalind was embezzling funds from the Cunningham estate and that Evelyn had just discovered the crime. Sienna's plan was to lure Rosalind to an isolated location, orchestrate her death, and carefully stage evidence implicating Evelyn as the vengeful murderer. Dark as it was, Sienna believed this plan would sever Evelyn from Alexander once and for all. And so began the prelude to murder, a twisted symphony of cunning, jealousy, and betrayal that would soon destroy an innocent life. On a foggy autumn evening, Sienna set her plan into action. She called Rosalind under the guise of wanting legal advice on a sensitive business matter concerning Alexander's interests. Rosalind, ever concerned about Evelyn's well-being and suspecting something was off, agreed to meet Sienna at a secluded cafe on the outskirts of the city. From there, Sienna claimed they would drive to a private property to discuss confidential documents away from prying eyes. Rosalind never returned from that meeting. Under the cover of darkness, Sienna had lured Rosalind to an abandoned lakeside cabin, claiming it was owned by the marketing firm for discreet off-site gatherings. In reality, it was a decrepit structure far removed from civilization. The caretaker for the property, bribed and intimidated, had turned a blind eye. Once inside, Rosalind grew uneasy. The place looked barely habitable. She questioned Sienna, who feigned innocence. It was then that a masked accomplice emerged, forcibly subduing Rosalind. The last thing Rosalind saw was Sienna's cold, triumphant stare. Sienna's accomplice planted carefully crafted evidence, documents bearing Evelyn's forged signature, referencing legal threats against Rosalind. Snippets of text messages, fabricated and time-stamped, were set to be discovered later, suggesting Rosalind had threatened to expose Evelyn for some fictional crime, and that Evelyn had responded with violent intent. In a final, chilling act, Sienna arranged for Rosalind's lifeless body to be found in such a way that suggested a desperate struggle, one in which Evelyn, presumably, had the motive to end Rosalind's life before any potential secrets could be unveiled. With Rosalind gone, the next step was to ensure the authorities found the right clues. The payoff to the accomplice and the caretaker ensured they would point law enforcement in Evelyn's direction. Overnight, a quiet lake cabin became a crime scene brimming with false evidence. Within days, the police came knocking at the estate. Evelyn was beside herself with shock and grief when the detectives arrived. They bore official warrants to search her home office. Alexander, outraged, demanded to know the meaning of this. The lead detective explained that Rosalind Porter was dead, murdered, and overwhelming evidence implicated Evelyn. Stunned and trembling, Evelyn could only stutter. I would never hurt Rosalind. She was my friend." Yet the planted texts, the forged documents, and even a set of footprints that matched Evelyn's shoe-size Sienna had stolen a pair from the estate weeks earlier, painted a damning picture. Alexander vehemently defended his wife, but the evidence left him confused and unsure. Why were there messages from Evelyn to Rosalind referencing blackmail? Why did documents show Evelyn signing off on secret money transfers? It defied everything he knew about his wife, but it was all right there in front of him. The press, already suspicious about the tension in the Cunningham household, had a field day. Headlines flashed: billionaire's pregnant wife suspected in brutal murder of longtime friend. Through it all, Sienna played the concerned professional, offering Alexander support in the midst of this public crisis. Even as Evelyn was carted away in handcuffs, Sienna managed to stand by Alexander's side at press conferences, wearing a mask of sorrow and quiet outrage on his behalf. The trap had sprung, and the pregnant wife, innocent though she was, found herself in a living nightmare. The case went to trial in an atmosphere of sensationalism. Media vans lined the courthouse steps, and reporters shouted questions at Alexander, who arrived each day looking increasingly distraught. Evelyn, wearing maternity clothes that could not conceal her growing belly, stood accused of first-degree murder. Despite her reputable background, public opinion was split. Some believed a personal feud or jealousy had driven her to kill, while others suspected a conspiracy. Unfortunately, the manufactured evidence seemed too convincing for most to ignore. The prosecution laid out a narrative of financial impropriety. They presented documents allegedly discovered in Evelyn's personal files indicating Rosalind had stumbled upon irregularities in the estate's accounts, implicating Evelyn in embezzlement. According to these false records, Rosalind had threatened to reveal Evelyn's wrongdoing, prompting an enraged Evelyn to act violently. It was a story that left Evelyn devastated. She tried to explain it made no sense. She had no reason to embezzle money when she was married to Alexander, whose resources were open to her. The explanation fell on skeptical ears. Alexander employed the best defense team money could buy, yet each piece of evidence was carefully planted to weave an intricate web of guilt. The text messages, for instance, showed a conversation that never took place, but the digital forensics, manipulated through a corrupt specialist on Sienna's payroll, could not prove it was fabricated. Witnesses bribed to recall arguments they claimed to have overheard testified that Evelyn had publicly admonished Rosalind during a gathering. Never mind, these arguments never happened. The judge had no reason to doubt these upstanding citizens in reality, stooges of Sienna. As the weeks wore on, Evelyn's mental and physical health deteriorated. She was forced to remain in custody, though the court allowed her special medical accommodations due to her pregnancy. At night, she wept in a stark cell, fearing for her unborn child's future. She wrote letters to Alexander, professing her innocence, describing her anguish, and begging him to believe her. He read them with a breaking heart, torn between the love he felt for his wife and the avalanche of circumstantial evidence that defied logic. Through it all, Sienna continued to offer Alexander a supportive shoulder. She cultivated an image as his trusted ally, speaking to the press with carefully measured sympathy. Behind closed doors, she insisted Evelyn must be guilty. Why else would the evidence be so overwhelming? Alexander, in his darkest moments, began to question everything he believed he knew. Guilt gnawed at him for the affair, but he found himself powerless to unravel the mystery that had trapped his wife. When the verdict was finally announced, guilty of first-degree murder, Evelyn nearly collapsed. She clutched her swollen stomach, tears streaming down her face as the courtroom erupted in murmurs. No one seemed to hear her anguished cry, "I'm innocent!" The judge's final pronouncement was that Evelyn Cunningham was to be remanded into custody until after the birth of her child, at which time a formal sentence would be handed down. In that moment, the world saw a tragic figure, a young, pregnant woman condemned to live out the worst nightmare imaginable. Sienna, meanwhile, watched with triumphant eyes. She had orchestrated every detail perfectly, not just shattering Evelyn's life, but also drawing Alexander ever closer into her toxic web. But karma, as they say, has a long memory. Evelyn settled into a routine of bleak despair at the Women's Correctional Facility. Initially placed in the medical wing due to her pregnancy, she endured invasive checkups, harsh stares from guards who had read headlines labeling her a monster, and the suffocating feeling of being both physically confined and morally convicted for a crime she never committed. Every night, she battled insomnia, haunted by the memory of Rosalind's kind face and the knowledge that someone had engineered this vicious lie to pin Rosalind's death on her. There were small mercies. A sympathetic nurse named Carla, who ensured Evelyn received proper prenatal vitamins, a chaplain who stopped by once a week to offer words of hope, and occasional visits from Alexander. His visits were emotionally charged. He would hold her hand through the bars, tears in his eyes, promising to hire new investigators to find the truth. Yet, day after day, no new evidence surfaced. Evelyn tried to be strong for her unborn child, but each passing week without progress felt like another nail sealing her fate. Alexander, outside the prison walls, found himself increasingly reliant on Sienna. With Gregory Cunningham gravely ill, Alexander had no family support system. While some longtime family friends empathized with him, many distanced themselves, wary of the scandal. Sienna capitalized on this isolation, moving herself into Alexander's circle as a business consultant, a crisis manager, and a friend who was just there to help. Publicly, the press questioned why Sienna appeared side by side with Alexander so often, but she spun it as loyalty to a valued client in dire circumstances. In truth, she was tightening her grip on Alexander, expecting him to declare his love for her, now that Evelyn was effectively out of the picture. Behind bars, Evelyn clung to any shred of hope. She wrote letters to the judge, detailing inconsistencies in the evidence. She pleaded with old colleagues from her law firm for help. Over time, a few concerned parties began to suspect foul play. An old friend from the legal community, Marcus Flynn, started his own independent investigation. Though resources were limited, he pored over financial records, phone logs, and digital footprints. Something about the case felt too perfect, too orchestrated. However, for every questionable lead he found, there was a dead end waiting. Sienna had made sure the trail was well covered. As Evelyn's due date approached, her health came under closer scrutiny. The prison wardens worried about potential complications, given her elevated stress. She was transferred to a local hospital's secure wing, awaiting the birth under constant guard. She feared the very real possibility that she would deliver her baby alone, only to have the infant taken away immediately. The thought of losing not just her freedom, but also her child, threatened to destroy her spirit altogether. Yet, amidst this darkness, Evelyn held on to a kernel of faith that the truth would eventually rise. She had no idea that her downfall was but a piece of a larger puzzle, orchestrated by a woman whose capacity for cruelty seemed boundless, and that fate, ever watchful, was patiently waiting for its chance to restore balance. As fate would have it, Evelyn's labor began under dramatic circumstances. She was in her hospital bed, dozing fitfully, when intense contractions gripped her midsection. The prison guards alerted the medical staff, who rushed in to help. The hours of labor were agonizing, a mixture of physical torment and emotional heartbreak. Fear coursed through Evelyn's mind. Would she even get to hold her baby? Alexander arrived just in time, having been notified by the hospital. Despite the tension and the armed guard by the door, the medical staff allowed him to stay by Evelyn's side. He held her hand, murmuring words of encouragement, tears in his eyes as she fought through each contraction. After what felt like an eternity, Evelyn brought a baby girl into the world. The tiny newborn cried out, unaware of the turmoil surrounding her birth. For a fleeting moment, everything else receded. Alexander kissed Evelyn's damp forehead, awe-struck by their daughter's fragile beauty. Evelyn, tears streaming down her cheeks, whispered, "Our baby girl." She felt a surge of unconditional love that momentarily eclipsed the injustice crushing her. She named the baby Abigail, a name she had cherished since childhood. But as soon as Evelyn was stable, reality crashed down again. A female prison guard entered the room, flanked by a hospital social worker. Formalities dictated that Abigail could not remain with a convicted murderer. Alexander demanded to take custody of his daughter, and the social worker agreed to place Abigail in his care. Evelyn handed the swaddled infant to him with trembling arms, sorrow etched across her face. She barely had time to kiss Abigail's forehead before the staff escorted the infant away. Over the next couple of days, Evelyn remained in the hospital to recover under guard, longing for her baby. She could only see Abigail during brief, supervised visits. The heartbreak was nearly unbearable. Each time she touched her daughter's little fingers, she wanted to sob and beg anyone to see the truth of her innocence. Outside the hospital, Sienna wasted no time insinuating herself into Alexander's life as he cared for the newborn. She visited the mansion often, ostensibly to discuss business strategies and help with crisis management regarding Evelyn's conviction. In reality, she was planting herself in Alexander's domestic sphere. She'd rock baby Abigail, cooing softly as if trying to replace Evelyn's role entirely. Alexander, depleted and emotionally raw, was too overwhelmed to question her intentions. At times, he even felt grateful for her help, given that he was a single father in a chaotic storm of scandal. Yet, each time Sienna held Abigail, a darker purpose glimmered behind her gentle smile. She believed she had succeeded in erasing Evelyn's presence. Soon enough, she thought, Alexander would be free to marry her, and then everything, the fortune, the influence, even fatherhood would be under her control. Evelyn's unborn child had been a mere inconvenience, but Sienna reasoned that raising the billionaire's baby might only strengthen her ties to him. Little did she know, however, that the very child she held in her arms was part of a destiny that would unravel her carefully plotted scheme. Back at the prison, Evelyn descended into postpartum depression. She had carried her baby for 9 months, dreaming of a shared life, yet she was locked away from her child's milestones. Letters from Alexander were her only lifeline, describing Abigail's coos and first smiles. Occasionally, It'd include a photo of the infant. Though it warmed Evelyn's heart to see her child growing, it also felt like a cruel reminder of what she was missing. Inside Alexander's circle, an unexpected shift began. Gregory Cunningham, on what doctors called his deathbed, rallied enough strength to ask questions about the trial. Though often bedridden, his mind was still sharp. He inquired why the evidence against Evelyn had seemed almost too perfect. He pressed Alexander to investigate further. Despite his frailty, Gregory demanded that a private detective he trusted be brought on the case. Concerned for his father's fragile health, Alexander relented. This private detective was a retired FBI agent named Samuel Armitage. Known for his tenacity, Armitage sifted through every detail with fresh eyes. Where others saw a closed case, Armitage saw anomalies. The footprints, supposedly matching Evelyn's size, did not account for the width of her feet. The digital messages, while damning, lacked the random personal details real conversations often carried. And the caretaker of that lakeside property? He vanished right after Rosalind's murder. These discrepancies began pointing to a grand orchestration. Meanwhile, Sienna found her own life taking an unanticipated turn. She had aligned her entire future around Alexander, expecting him to quickly divorce or annul his marriage to a convicted murderer. Yet, weeks and months passed, and Alexander still hadn't initiated divorce proceedings. He was entirely devoted to caring for Abigail and dealing with his father's failing health. As Sienna tried to pry her way into the family circle cooking meals, rearranging the mansion's decor, she realized Gregory Cunningham's animosity toward her. He might have been too weak to speak openly against her, but his eyes burned with distrust whenever she entered his room. Feeling cornered, Sienna intensified her manipulations, urging Alexander to declare Evelyn incompetent or to take legal action to remove her parental rights. Alexander resisted, citing Evelyn's emotional connection to Abigail. He insisted the child needed her mother at least in some capacity. This frustrated Sienna to no end. In her bitterness, she started lashing out, letting glimpses of her true nature slip. She snapped at staff, belittled them for minor mistakes. Rumors spread that Sienna was controlling and harsh. Still, Alexander remained in an emotional fog. His father's precarious condition weighed on him, as did the responsibility of single parenthood. He desperately wanted to believe in Evelyn's innocence, but he was haunted by the mountain of fabricated evidence. Every moment, he felt torn between his convictions and the illusions carefully spun around him. But the tides were beginning to shift. Samuel Armitage's quiet investigation hinted that something was not right. Gregory Cunningham, though frail, was determined to see his beloved daughter-in-law vindicated. In the background, the forces of karma were stirring, preparing to bring long-overdue justice to Evelyn and a merciless reckoning to the puppet master who thought she could keep her crimes hidden forever. As Samuel Armitage's investigation progressed, he discovered a crucial piece of evidence, a forged email chain between Evelyn and Rosalind. The language in these emails was stilted, filled with phrases Evelyn would never use. Armitage also found that the metadata timestamps had been altered, something a skilled hacker could do, but it left behind digital signatures that indicated tampering. He presented his findings to Alexander in a private meeting. Alexander listened, face pale, hands trembling on the table. For the first time, tangible proof suggested Evelyn had been set up. Armitage recommended speaking with the caretaker of the lakeside property, who had fled to another state. Armitage tracked the man down, finally persuading him to reveal how a mysterious woman with dark hair and green eyes had paid him a large sum to disappear and say nothing. The caretaker also recalled hearing the name Sienna during a phone conversation. He had been too frightened to come forward earlier, fearing retaliation. Now, with Armitage's assurance of protection, he was willing to testify. Armed with this information, Alexander confronted Sienna at the mansion. She scoffed, feigning disbelief. "You can't trust some random caretaker," she snapped, crossing her arms. But Alexander noticed her eyes flicker with panic. For the first time, she seemed out of control. When he demanded that she leave, Sienna pivoted to threats. She warned that if he ruined her reputation, she would release more incriminating documents, possibly framing him alongside Evelyn. Shocked by her audacity, Alexander was left speechless. Sienna stormed out, her posture stiff with rage. That same night, Gregory Cunningham's condition deteriorated rapidly. Doctors said it was only a matter of hours or days. Summoning all his courage, Alexander went to his father's bedside and told him about the caretaker's testimony. Gregory, breathing with difficulty, gripped Alexander's hand and whispered, "Clear her name. Do it. For your child." Those words galvanized Alexander into action. With Armitage's help, he planned to file a motion for a new trial, presenting the caretaker's testimony and the evidence of digital tampering. Word of the caretaker's confession found its way to the press, causing a stir. Speculations ran wild about a shadowy figure behind the murder. Some media outlets even suggested Sienna Royce by name, citing her suspicious closeness to Alexander and Evelyn's known distrust of her. Sienna, cornered by these rumors, went on the offensive. She gave a televised interview, claiming people were trying to smear her, that she had always been a loyal ally to the Cunninghams. But her performance felt unconvincing, lacking the polished composure she usually displayed. Behind bars, Evelyn heard the news through her friend Marcus Flynn. She felt a spark of hope. Could this be the path to her exoneration? She prayed for a miracle, tears of relief, mingling with the lingering fear that Sienna might strike back before justice could be served. In the thick of this unraveling chaos, a final twist awaited. Fate, it seemed, was about to deliver the ultimate blow, and that blow would come from a place no one expected. Amid the upheaval, Sienna's own health took a sudden, startling turn. An underlying heart condition, one she had concealed for years, flared up, perhaps exacerbated by the stress. She collapsed in her penthouse apartment, alone and terrified, her heart racing uncontrollably. By the time paramedics arrived, she was unresponsive. Rushed to the hospital, she slipped in and out of consciousness. The doctors managed to stabilize her, but the prognosis was dire. She was dying. In her lucid moments, Sienna realized her carefully built empire of lies was collapsing around her. Armitage's investigation, the caretaker's confession, and mounting public suspicion meant she might face prison if she recovered. Worse, she feared dying alone, unrepentant, with the guilt of murder on her soul. She requested to see Alexander, a final demand that stunned the medical staff. Unsure whether to comply, Alexander hesitated. But when the doctors explained Sienna likely had only hours to live, he agreed, accompanied by Armitage as a witness. He walked into the hushed hospital room, the machines beeping softly, the fluorescent lights casting stark shadows across Sienna's gaunt face. She looked diminished, no trace of the elegant woman who once commanded boardrooms. Her eyes flickered with shame and sorrow. She beckoned Alexander closer, her voice weak. "Alexander, I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never intended it to go this far." A rasping cough halted her speech. Alexander stood there, stoic, waiting. Armitage quietly recorded the conversation, having obtained permission from the hospital staff. Between tortured breaths, Sienna confessed everything. She admitted to orchestrating Rosalind's murder, forging the evidence to frame Evelyn. She acknowledged her hidden accomplice, the caretaker's bribery, and the digital tampering. Tears slid down her cheeks as she described her twisted reasoning, how she felt overshadowed by Evelyn, desperate to secure Alexander and his fortune, resentful of Evelyn's pregnancy. In that moment, Alexander's fury and sorrow merged into something colder, more profound. Still, he managed to maintain composure. This confession would exonerate Evelyn. Yet, hearing how easily Sienna had destroyed innocent lives chilled him to the core. He asked, voice breaking, "Why did you do it?" "You knew I loved Evelyn." Sienna's eyes fell shut, her breath shallower by the second. "I wanted your world, your name, your child, everything," she managed. Regret contorted her features. "I never thought it would weigh on me like this." Then, with a trembling hand, she pressed a small flash drive into Alexander's palm. "Backup of everything," she wheezed. "Proof you need." Moments later, Sienna sank back against the pillows, a tremor passing through her body. The beeping from the monitors grew erratic. Medical staff rushed in, but it was too late. Sienna Royce exhaled her last breath, carrying her heartbreak and envy into the unknown. Alexander stood there, numb, as Armitage ended the recording. The full weight of Sienna's words settled in. At last, the truth had emerged, not from law books or cunning detectives alone, but from a dying woman's final, desperate confession. Evelyn could finally be freed. Yet, the cost had been immeasurable: a close friend murdered, a child born into tragedy, and a family shattered by deception. With Sienna's recorded confession and the flash drive in hand, Alexander and Armitage moved swiftly. They contacted Evelyn's defense attorneys, who filed an immediate appeal for reversal of her conviction. The new evidence was overwhelming. Sienna had admitted to framing Evelyn, and the digital records on the flash drive corroborated her every word. Within days, the case took a dramatic turn. Prosecutors announced that they would drop all charges against Evelyn Cunningham and expunge her record. The judge signed the necessary documents, and just like that, Evelyn's innocence stood vindicated. That day, Alexander arrived at the prison with official paperwork, tears in his eyes as he watched the guards unlock the cell door. Dressed in a plain jumpsuit, her hair thinner and eyes shadowed by sleepless nights, Evelyn stepped out in disbelief. As soon as she saw him, she rushed into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. The moment felt surreal, a sudden and long-awaited victory after months of crushing despair. Outside, a small crowd of reporters had gathered, along with a few loyal friends who never stopped believing in Evelyn's innocence. Cameras clicked rapidly as the couple emerged, hand in hand, tears still wet on their cheeks. For once, the tabloid headlines were sympathetic. Wrongly convicted mother freed, truth exposed in high society murder. Marcus Flynn and Samuel Armitage stood nearby, offering words of relief and congratulation. A sense of communal catharsis filled the air. Later that night, Alexander took Evelyn to see their daughter. Abigail, now several months old, reached out tiny hands in curiosity as her mother held her for the first time outside a prison setting. Evelyn wept at how much the child had grown. She marveled at the soft coos, the bright eyes that gazed back at her. In that tender moment, she felt more gratitude than she could express for life, for justice, and for the future she still had a chance to shape. Gregory Cunningham, too, lived just long enough to see Evelyn cleared of all charges. When Evelyn entered his room, he mustered a small smile, relief evident in his sunken eyes. He took her hand, his voice barely a whisper. "I knew you were innocent. So glad you're home." He died peacefully the following day, comforted by the knowledge that his granddaughter would not grow up with her mother behind bars. In the days that followed, Alexander publicly acknowledged his own failings. He owned up to the affair, expressing deep remorse for how his indiscretions had paved the way for Sienna's manipulations. While the public showed some scorn for his betrayal, they also recognized the tragedy he had endured. Though forgiveness wouldn't come easily, Evelyn's unwavering love and the sanctity of family provided a path toward healing. As for Sienna, her ashes remained unclaimed in a cold morgue for weeks. Eventually, distant relatives arranged a modest ceremony, No one from the Cunningham family attended. Her story ended not in triumph, but in a poignant cautionary tale of how far envy and greed can carry someone before karmic retribution finally intervenes. Life after the storm was not without challenges, but it was a new beginning for Evelyn, Alexander, and their precious Abigail. The estate, once a backdrop for deception, slowly transformed into a genuine home. Evelyn took charge of philanthropic projects again, this time focusing on helping wrongfully convicted individuals, inspired by her own harrowing ordeal. She set up a fund named after Rosalind Porter, ensuring her friend's tragic demise would save others from similar injustices. Alexander, for his part, worked tirelessly to rebuild trust. He dismantled the marketing firm where Sienna had worked, unearthing more evidence of her unscrupulous dealings. He apologized publicly not just to Evelyn, but to Rosalind's family, whose grief was immeasurable. Over time, his sincerity softened some of the resentment people felt toward him. Though he could never undo the past, he resolved to use his wealth and influence more responsibly. In the corporate world, rumors abounded about the curse of Sienna's ambition. Several former associates who had assisted her in forging evidence or covering tracks found themselves under investigation. Some faced charges for conspiracy, bribery, and obstruction of justice. One by one, they fell from their positions of comfort, forced to contend with the same legal system they had once manipulated. It seemed, indeed, that karma was wide-reaching, leaving no stone unturned. For Evelyn, the healing process was both physical and emotional. Nightmares still haunted her. Sometimes she'd wake in a cold sweat, reliving the moment of her wrongful arrest or hearing the clang of prison doors in her mind. Yet each dawn brought renewed faith in the love of her family. Holding Abigail close, she would remind herself how precious freedom was, how fleeting life could be, and how important it was to cherish every untainted moment. Alexander's guilt, though softened, remained a heavy burden. He attended marriage counseling sessions with Evelyn, determined to prove his fidelity and devotion. Uncertain at first, Evelyn gradually let him back into her heart, building a deeper, more honest bond than before. As time passed, they found themselves forging a new foundation, one built on transparency, respect, and mutual understanding. Their journey wasn't easy, but each small victory in their relationship felt like a testament to their resilience. And so, the once shattered Cunningham family learned to live again. Their story became a stark reminder that love, when tested by betrayal and tragedy, can either crumble or emerge stronger. Evelyn and Alexander chose the latter. Bound by their child, the memory of a beloved father, and the luminous spirit of a friend lost too soon, they carried on with renewed purpose. The downfall of Sienna Royce stood as a testament to the ultimate law of cause and effect. No matter how carefully one spins a web of lies, truth has a way of breaking through, and when it does, it arrives with uncompromising force. From a prison cell to a tearful homecoming, from a mistress's cunning plot to a confession on her deathbed, the tapestry of life had woven tragedy and hope into a single, bitter-sweet tale. In the end, justice prevailed, love survived, and karma delivered its final blow to those who dared manipulate fate for personal gain. In the end, the truth outshone every lie, and justice found its rightful place even when it seemed too late. Sienna Royce's twisted ambition and bitter jealousy led to her own destruction, proving once more that no amount of cunning can outrun karma forever. Evelyn, wrongfully accused and separated from her newborn child, emerged with her freedom reclaimed and her family's future ahead of her. Yet, her battle scars remain a poignant reminder of life's unpredictability and the cost of misplaced trust.
They say money can buy anything except anonymity from the internet. One crisp summer morning, billionaire industrialist David Harrington thought he'd scored the perfect getaway with a bewitching companion half his age. Sunlit waves shimmered behind them in an Instagram post he never dreamed would shatter his life. Within hours, a fiery storm of comments erupted, accusing the mysterious woman of being someone far more dangerous than she appeared. The rumors spiraled into a full-blown expose that threatened not just David's crumbling marriage, but also his image and legacy. In a single click, the world learned that secrets, no matter how well funded, rarely remain buried. David Harrington had always been a man who commanded attention the instant he walked into a room. At 6 feet 2 inches, with tailored suits that seemed to drape his athletic frame flawlessly, he radiated a polished self-assurance cultivated over decades of hard work and strategic gambles. Born in Chicago to a middle-class family, David displayed an early flair for numbers and negotiation. By the time he was in college, he'd already built 2 small businesses, one reselling refurbished laptops out of his dorm, and another importing artisanal leather wallets from Italy. He was a hustler in the best sense of the word, unrelenting in his pursuit of prosperity. When he turned 25, David took his biggest risk yet. He convinced an angel investor named Richard Carmichael, a man revered for his savvy in emerging markets, to pour $500,000 into a software automation startup David co-founded. It was an audacious move, especially in a market saturated with bigger, more established players. But David's persuasion worked. Within 18 months, the startup was acquired by a larger tech conglomerate, netting David his first major fortune. It was the start of an illustrious career that would see him founding or funding a series of successful ventures into technology, real estate, and even renewable energy. By his mid-30s, David Harrington was wealthy beyond imagination, yet his ambition burned brighter. He was rarely satisfied. Gone were the days of renting modest apartments and living on fast food. He now presided over a sprawling empire, complete with offices in New York, London, Singapore, and Sao Paulo. He jetted around the globe for business deals, indulging in the high-life trappings, private yachts membership at exclusive clubs, and a mansion perched atop the Hollywood Hills with a ski-line view that glittered like diamonds at night. But hidden beneath the aura of success was a restless void. He was married, yes, to the beautiful and accomplished Sarah Whitmore. They met at a charity event in Los Angeles, bonding over a shared passion for philanthropy. Sarah, an Ivy League-educated lawyer turned environmental activist, had grown up in a similarly middle-class background. She understood David's drive and matched him in intellect. For a while they seemed the ultimate power couple, publicly philanthropic, privately fierce in their love and ambitions. However, time and relentless pursuit of more money placed stress cracks in their marriage. David's constant travel, late-night negotiations, and if rumors were to be believed, unstoppable appetite for new experiences, all weighed heavily on Sarah. As David's orbit expanded, she found herself increasingly sidelined, overshadowed by the gravitational pull of his ambitions. Even the philanthropic causes they once championed together were neglected. David wrote the checks, but rarely bothered to attend the galas or volunteer events anymore. By the time he was in his early 40s, the heart of their relationship had eroded, replaced by polite tolerance and carefully orchestrated public appearances. That was the environment in which David would eventually make a series of decisions, culminating in the scandal that would rock his world. Fueled by ego and weary of the stale comfort his marriage had devolved into, he sought excitement elsewhere. He believed he was untouchable, convinced his well-oiled team of advisors and the iron curtain of wealth could conceal any indiscretions. But David Harrington was about to learn one of life's harshest truths in the digital era. Every secret has a lifespan. All it takes is a single post for an empire's pristine facade to come crashing down. Sarah Whitmore Harrington was no stranger to adversity. Raised by a single mother in a modest Chicago neighborhood, she thrived academically, eventually securing a full scholarship to Columbia University. While her classmates carried designer purses and took spring breaks in Europe, Sarah juggled part-time jobs at coffee shops and university libraries. She took pride in her self-reliance, never shying away from hard work and rigorous study. By her mid-20s, Sarah was practicing corporate law at a prestigious Manhattan firm. She was brilliant, resilient, and notably empathetic. Those qualities caught the attention of an internal pro bono committee, which led her to champion several environmental cases against big corporations. Her compassion for the underdog and her deep sense of justice made her a formidable foe in legal negotiations. She even won a high-profile lawsuit that forced a major chemical company to pay millions in damages to a marginalized community. The victory made headlines, and from that moment, Sarah became recognized not just as a skilled lawyer, but as a warrior for ethical responsibility. That was how she met David at a black tie fundraiser in Los Angeles, where he presented a sizable check to the environmental organization she represented. The sparks flew instantly. In him, she saw a titan with an innate gift for making money, and an equally fervent philanthropic side, an individual who could potentially reshape industries for the better. In her, he saw a steadfast spirit, beautiful both inside and out, and a partner whose intellect could match his. Their courtship was whirlwind. They dined at Michelin-starred restaurants, attended exclusive events, and traveled abroad to meet potential charity partners in places like Nairobi and Mumbai. Within 6 months, they were married in a lavish beach ceremony in Maui, complete with dignitaries, celebrities, and the who's who of venture capital in attendance. However, the transition from newlyweds to a stable marriage was rocky. David's businesses, spread across multiple sectors, demanded constant attention and travel. Meanwhile, Sarah transitioned from corporate law to running her own not-for-profit legal consultancy for environmental issues, an endeavor that required significant energy and focus. They saw each other less and less. The times they did manage to reconnect were overshadowed by David's phone calls, emails, and text notifications. Despite the cracks in their relationship, Sarah believed she still knew David better than anyone else. She sensed when he was exhausted, recognized when his bravado was merely a cover for deeper anxieties. She also recognized as his success soared to new heights that he was falling into certain patterns, seeking novelty, losing interest in things that once mattered, constantly pushing boundaries. But she never quite dared to voice her growing suspicions. She wanted to preserve their public image, and more critically, she didn't want to face the reality that her husband might be cheating. Then the subtle shifts started. David became secretive about his phone, quickly changing screens when she walked by. He started going on business trips to places that made no sense, or at times that were uncharacteristic for the industries he worked in. Once Sarah found a diamond bracelet in his study desk, one that was clearly not for her, as she had never once expressed interest in that style, nor had he gifted her something similar in years. She brushed it off, attributing it to a possible gift for a female investor or sponsor. But deep down, she suspected. Sarah thought about confronting him multiple times, yet her pride held her back. In her mind, relationships were built on honesty and trust, but confronting David without proof felt like a betrayal of her self-respect. She wanted certainty. She needed to be sure. In the quiet corners of her soul, she wondered if it might be easier to look away, to focus on her philanthropic work, and to let David chase his illusions. After all, they maintained a semblance of stability. They weren't short on money. Her beloved mother was comfortable living in a gorgeous townhouse that Sarah and David financed. On the surface, her life seemed perfect. But as the months rolled on, Sarah felt a gathering storm, an anxiety that gnawed at her. Something in her marriage and David was shifting. For all her accomplishments, for all her unwavering character, she was powerless to stop whatever was happening. A sense of impending disaster loomed. She could almost hear the faint thunderclap on the horizon. She just didn't know how or when it would strike, only that it was coming, and when it did, it would change everything. David Harrington first laid eyes on Layla St. James at a private art exhibit in Soho. The event was one of those exclusive gatherings of the ultra-wealthy and avant-garde, a place to see and be seen. She stood in front of a painting, a swirl of neon colors, something abstract and disorienting, and seemed lost in thought. She wore a simple yet elegant emerald green dress, her tawny hair falling in loose waves down her back. David was immediately intrigued by her aura of quiet confidence. He approached her fully expecting that easy spark he often found in conversations. Layla, however, surprised him. She greeted him with polite warmth, but spoke with a self-assuredness and intellectual depth that caught him off guard. She was not overly impressed by his status or money. At least she didn't show it in the usual fawning way. Instead, she asked him questions about his philanthropic endeavors, referencing a literacy program in Southeast Asia that David's foundation had once funded. Few people outside his close circle even knew about that. It was an obscure project, overshadowed by his more flashy contributions. Fascinated by her knowledge, he pressed further. Layla revealed she was an art historian by training, had worked in Europe's auction circuit, and recently moved to New York to pursue her own gallery aspirations. She claimed she had grown tired of the pretentiousness in traditional art circles and wanted to start a space that embraced both established and emerging artists. Over a cocktail in the exhibit's VIP lounge, Layla recounted travel stories from her time in Paris, how she'd negotiated million-dollar deals for rare impressionist works. Her voice dripped with a delicate, almost musical accent. David couldn't quite place a mix, she said, from traveling around the world. In the weeks that followed, they exchanged numbers. David found himself texting Layla at odd hours, discussing art world politics and eventually drifting into flirtation. Layla reciprocated, sprinkling their conversations with subtle compliments and innuendo that kept David on his toes. It felt like a dance one that David had not experienced in a long time. Sarah had once been his intellectual equal, but now their discussions were overshadowed by property deals, lawsuits, and superficial gatherings. Layla offered something new, something fresh. Their first real date came under the guise of a business meeting at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Midtown. David told himself he was merely exploring philanthropic collaboration, maybe funding an art initiative Layla had proposed. But by dessert, they were lost in each other's eyes. A wave of guilt threatened to crash over David, but he quelled it with a glass of Chateau Lafite Rothschild, rationalizing that he deserved happiness. Life was too short, and he had worked too hard. If he couldn't indulge once in a while, what was the point of all this success? Days turned into weeks, and he found every excuse to see Layla. A hotel suite at the Pierre, a weekend in the Hamptons. David claimed he had an urgent real estate matter to attend to. Layla was always there, radiant, engaging, confident in her allure. But there was something else about her, a certain mystery that David couldn't pinpoint. She rarely spoke about her family or past relationships. She was cagey whenever he asked about the specifics of her work in Europe. His curiosity was piqued, but the thrill of their clandestine encounters overshadowed any red flags. In private moments, Layla would talk about the future, teasing a world where they might be more public in their romance. David smiled, uncertain if he could ever cross that line. He was still tethered by a marriage that he had not fully admitted was over. Yet Layla's world was intoxicating and like a moth drawn to flame. He ignored the risk. The more David's desire grew, the more brazen he became about their affair. Eventually, a reckless idea took shape in his mind. He had a beachside villa in Belize that was rarely used. Perhaps a little tropical escape was just what they needed. Sun, sand, and secrecy far from prying eyes. Layla loved the idea, squealing with excitement at the notion of turquoise waters and private cabanas. They decided on a date, making hush-hush travel plans through David's private jet. In David's mind, this was a contained fantasy, a secret paradise sealed away from the rest of his life. No one would ever know. They would be safe to indulge, if only for a few days. He should have remembered that secrets don't stay buried forever. And with social media's insatiable appetite for drama, a single misstep could set off a chain reaction he'd never see coming. The villa in Belize was a pristine haven surrounded by palm trees, with a private stretch of powdery white sand extending into azure waters. It was the kind of place people only see in glossy travel magazines, one David rarely got to enjoy, thanks to his busy schedule. Layla's eyes sparkled when they arrived. She ran to the ocean's edge, letting the warm waves lap at her feet. David watched her heart fluttering with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Somewhere in the recesses of his conscience, a small voice asked, "Is this worth it?" He silenced it, enticed by the vision of Layla on the beach. Each morning they lounged under canopied daybeds, sipping tropical cocktails and listening to the rhythmic crash of waves. David felt more alive than he had in years. He indulged in Layla's laughter, her spontaneous dances in the sand, the ways she made him forget about corporate boardrooms and stifling responsibilities. This was freedom, no obligations, no routine, just the two of them enjoying life's simple pleasures. On the second day, after a lazy breakfast of fresh mangoes and coffee, Layla teased David with a challenge. "Let's take a picture, something special to remember this trip by." David hesitated. He had always maintained a strict no social media posts policy when it came to his private affairs. But the sunlight was dancing off the ocean, and Layla looked radiant in her turquoise bikini. She draped herself across a beach lounger, beckoning him closer. David relented, pulling out his phone. He snapped a few pictures of them together. Layla's head on his chest, the glimmering ocean behind them. Laughing, they flipped through the shots, choosing their favorites. Layla posted a couple of photos on her own discreet account set to private. She had only a handful of followers, mostly art world acquaintances, she said. David shrugged, telling himself that a handful of people with no ties to his life wouldn't make a difference. Still, he felt a pang of anxiety at the possibility of any slip. Emboldened by the day's carefree vibe, David grew reckless. Late that evening, after a lavish dinner prepared by the villa's private chef, Layla pressed herself against him and giggled. "Let's show off just a bit. Let's make them jealous." She grabbed his phone and teased him with an Instagram story post. "Just a quick shot of the sunset," she said, with a silhouette of them toasting wine glasses. She promised it wouldn't give away too much. "No faces, no location tags," she whispered. Caught up in the evening's romantic intoxication, David acquiesced. He posted it. The immediate response from his followers was mild. People admired the sunset, the luxurious atmosphere. But within minutes, eagle-eyed fans began to notice small details, the shape of a woman's figure in the reflection of the glass door, the second wine glass in David's hand. A few commented, enjoying a romantic getaway. David, others posted heart emojis and asked, "Where's Sarah?" That was the first red flag. David ignored it, telling himself it was harmless speculation. The next morning, in a haze of euphoria, David made a grave mistake. While Layla was frolicking in the waves, he snapped a candid shot of her, capturing her face in profile, then posted it to his main feed with a cryptic caption, "A moment of peace in paradise." He truly believed it was ambiguous enough that no one would identify her. He never tagged her account, never mentioned her name. But the internet has a way of connecting the dots. Within minutes, the post garnered thousands of likes. Then came the comments, some supportive, many curious, a few, laced with suspicion. A handful of David's close friends texted him directly. "Who is she?" Some used winking emojis, half joking. Others were more direct, worried that this could blow back on him if Sarah saw it. Unperturbed, David turned off his phone notifications, wanting to stay in their bubble of paradise a little while longer. It was on the final day of their trip that reality began to intrude. Unbeknownst to David, a tabloid blogger had recognized Layla's face from a rumor that had circulated in certain high society circles, an art dealer with a dubious past, rumored to seduce wealthy clients, rumored to have left Europe under a cloud of scandal. The blogger had ties to gossip circles across the globe and had access to hush-hush sources in the European art scene. By the time David and Layla boarded his private jet for the return flight to New York, the blogger was already working on an exposé cross-referencing images and combing through digital footprints. The seeds of disaster were planted, and neither David nor Layla had any clue that a social media storm was brewing. They touched down in New York that evening, stepping back into a world that would soon turn on them with alarming speed. For David, the beach vacation was a blissful memory. For the internet, it became the catalyst for a scandal that would reshape everything he thought he knew about his mistress, his marriage, and even himself. When David checked his phone after landing, he noticed a barrage of missed calls and frantic texts, primarily from his closest business associates and his public relations officer, Jacqueline Nguyen. His heart pounded as he glanced at the notifications. Typically, such a flurry of calls indicated a major development, a collapsed deal, maybe a crisis in one of his overseas offices. But as he skimmed through them, he realized the panic was personal, not professional. "David, call me ASAP." One text from Jacqueline read, "We have a problem on Instagram." Confused and apprehensive, he dialed Jacqueline's number. She picked up immediately, her voice strained. "David, you need to delete that post right now," she blurted before he could speak. "Calm down, Jackie." He attempted trying to maintain composure. "What's going on?" She launched into a rapid-fire explanation. "Your post with that woman on the beach." Someone recognized her. Comments are exploding. There's a rumor swirling that she's a con artist who allegedly scammed an art collector in Paris. People are sharing screenshots, old articles, everything. It's going viral. They're calling her the art world grifter. This is beyond just an affair rumor. This could turn into a full-blown scandal. David's head spun. He had braced himself for gossip about a potential mistress, but allegations of criminal activity took the situation to an entirely different level. He ended the call immediately, opened Instagram, and gaped at the flood of comments. Many asked, "Is that Layla St. James?" Others claimed she was wanted for questioning in Europe. Some linked to half-baked investigative pieces from obscure blogs. And then there were the moral judgments, David Harrington. How could you cheat on your wife with a criminal respect lost? Hypocrite. A real philanthropist wouldn't be with a con artist. Layla, who was seated beside him in his chauffeured car, scrolled through her own phone. He could see the color drain from her face. "David, we need to talk," she whispered, voice shaky. Not willing to address the situation in the car, he texted his driver to head to one of his discreet penthouse properties in Manhattan. He couldn't go home to his mansion. Sarah was likely there, and a confrontation now would be disastrous. Layla's expression was that of panic fused with indignation. "I don't understand why they're saying these things," she kept muttering. "I'm not a criminal." She tried to show him what she claimed were legitimate references from her past employers, though David barely glanced at them. Once they arrived at the penthouse, a sleek, modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, Layla collapsed onto a plush sofa. David paced phone in hand, reading through messages from colleagues, PR consultants, and even lawyers. His empire was built on a carefully curated image of competence and ethics. Any hint of scandal could harm investor confidence. And the fact that Sarah, widely respected in legal and philanthropic circles, might soon find out, was another ticking bomb. "I need you to tell me everything," David demanded, voice taut with urgency. "Why are people calling you a grifter? Were you accused of something in Europe? Tell me now, Layla." She exhaled, trembling. "I never scammed anyone. I was involved with a wealthy French collector. Yes, but I left because he was controlling and abusive. He spread rumors about me to cover his tracks. I never faced any charges. None of it is true." David studied her, trying to gauge the sincerity of her words. He had believed her wholeheartedly until this moment, but now his instincts sounded alarms. Something in her eyes. Was it fear, or was it guilt? The swirling chaos of the moment made it hard to read. A sense of betrayal and dread took hold of him. He realized that even if Layla was innocent, the public didn't care. Gossip and scandal had already latched onto them. The internet feeds on controversy, and they had served it up on a silver platter. The damage might already be done. Over the next few hours, David's crisis management team mobilized. He engaged his top-notch legal counsel, pressing them to craft a statement denying any criminal association. Jacqueline orchestrated a digital damage control strategy, locking down comments, removing the offending post, and issuing official disclaimers that any claims about Layla's criminal background were unsubstantiated rumors. But the internet had already taken screenshots. The post lived on in countless retweets and reshares. Worse still, the mainstream media was picking it up now. A celebrity gossip show ran a segment featuring the blurred-out images of David and Layla on the beach with a dramatic voiceover billionaire, David Harrington's rumored mistress, international con artist, or misunderstood muse. Speculative headlines mushroomed across tabloids, often accompanied by pictures of Sarah, his wronged wife looking stoic and poised at past charity events. On top of everything, phone calls from Sarah began lighting up David's screen. He couldn't bring himself to answer. His mind whirled in panic, trying to figure out how to spin this. He composed text after text to Sarah, erasing them before sending any. There was no easy way to explain. Perhaps the best he could do was beg for her forgiveness and attempt some sort of damage limitation. David, Layla said softly, breaking the tense silence. "I need you to believe me. I'm not who they say I am." He looked at her, swallowing the lump in his throat. "We'll figure this out." He managed, though he wasn't sure he believed his own words. But the question that truly haunted him was, had he been duped? And if so, was it just by a cunning seductress, or also by his own naive desire for excitement and novelty? The answer wouldn't remain hidden for long. The internet had taken hold of this scandal, and soon even darker revelations would surface, forcing David to confront secrets far more devastating than an affair. While David and Layla tried to contain the inferno in Manhattan, Sarah Harrington was at home, feeling as though the ground had opened beneath her feet. Initially, she had ignored the handful of texts from friends, hinting at David's suspicious Instagram post. She was used to rumors. But then her best friend, Monica Alvarez, sent a message that rattled her. "Please check the tabloids." "I'm so sorry, Sarah." With shaky hands, Sarah clicked a link Monica had forwarded. She saw David's Instagram post, the silhouette of a woman on a beach, and the avalanche of salacious comments and allegations. Her first reaction was numbness, an eerie calm that spread through her limbs. She had suspected David might be unfaithful, but seeing it unfold publicly was a different kind of pain. An hour later, her phone buzzed again. It was her mother, distressed and confused about the swirling rumors. Embarrassment flooded Sarah, a hot flush crawling up her cheeks. She assured her mother she was fine, even though her heart felt as if it were cracking in half. She forced herself to remain steady, telling her mother not to believe everything she read online. But the numbness soon gave way to anger, then heartbreak, then an odd sense of relief. At least now the rumors were in the open. No more doubts, no more illusions. She spent the next few hours pacing the living room, rereading old messages from David, analyzing their marriage from every angle. She felt a mixture of betrayal and odd detachment, as though she were hovering above herself, watching it all unfold from a distance. A short while later, David's chauffeur arrived at the mansion, dropping off a large black envelope. Sarah took it, opened it, and found legal documents inside, some half-baked statements from David's attorneys, disclaimers about the alleged mistress's background, and an apologetic note that ended with, "Please do not speak to the press. I will explain everything." There was no real apology, no admission of guilt. Just corporate-sounding instructions. It was like receiving a memo from a CEO to a subordinate, rather than a heartfelt message from a husband to his wife. Furious, she called David multiple times, but each attempt went to voicemail. She left a single message. "You owe me an explanation. David, I'm not some PR problem to be handled." Then she hung up, refusing to try again. That evening, as she attempted to navigate the swirling confusion, she received another unexpected visitor. Michael Whitmore, her cousin and fellow attorney, who also worked for a prestigious Los Angeles firm. Michael was in New York on business and had seen the online furore. He arrived unannounced, a supportive presence Sarah desperately needed. They sat in the living room, the mansion feeling too large, too grand for the gloom enveloping it. Sarah poured them both glasses of wine, her hands trembling ever so slightly. She recounted the situation, her suspicions, the damning Instagram post, the rumors about the mistress's criminal past. She felt exposed, humiliated. Michael listened patiently, asking pointed questions. "So this woman Layla might be a con artist," he said, swirling the wine in his glass. "Do we know if it's true?" Sarah shrugged. "I don't know anything anymore. I thought I knew David, but now I'm not so sure." Michael offered a thoughtful nod. "Look, Sarah, I can help you. Legally. We can figure out your options, whether it's a separation, a divorce, or simply negotiations for your protection. You shouldn't trust his attorneys. They'll protect him first. Sarah sighed, leaning back into the sofa's cushions. I appreciate that, but I need time to think. My marriage is on the line, and if this woman really is dangerous, I don't want to rush into any decisions I'll regret. Michael placed his hand over hers. I understand. But be cautious. Men like David with power and money can become unpredictable under pressure. Do what you must to protect yourself emotionally, legally, financially. That night, Sarah tried to sleep, but nightmares plagued her images of David and Layla on a beach swirling tabloids and faceless gossipers pointing fingers at her. The next morning, she decided she wouldn't be silent. If David wouldn't provide clarity, she would find it on her own. She scheduled a meeting with her own legal advisors, ignoring the suggestion in David's letter to remain quiet. She reached out to her charitable partners, confirming that she would continue her activism work, regardless of the scandal. The last thing she needed was for her philanthropic efforts to be overshadowed by her husband's affair. Amid the emotional turmoil, a flicker of her old resolve appeared. Sarah refused to let David's betrayal define her. If anything, it fortified her determination. If the woman in the scandal truly was a con artist, Sarah intended to expose the lies. And if the rumors were false, she would force David to explain why he had put her through this mortifying ordeal. From that point on, Sarah began her own quiet investigation. Friends in the art world, acquaintances in legal networks across Europe, she reached out to anyone who might have a lead on Layla St. James. She had no illusions that discovering the truth would fix her marriage, but at least she wouldn't be a passive spectator to her own humiliation. Little did she know her search for answers would set off the next wave of revelations, drawing her into a labyrinth of secrets deeper and more twisted than she could have ever imagined. Back at David's penthouse, tension hung in the air like a stagnant fog. Layla paced the living room, her phone constantly buzzing with text messages and calls. She ignored most, focusing instead on David, who was huddled over his laptop in a makeshift war room arrangement with his PR team via video conference. The official statements they had released weren't silencing the rumors. If anything, the chatter online seemed to grow louder, especially on niche art world forums. Jacqueline's voice crackled through the laptop speakers. David, we have to address these allegations head-on. We found some references to Layla's possible involvement with a French collector named Jean-Louis Moreau. He's rumored to have lost a significant sum purchasing forgeries from an unknown intermediary, someone described as an attractive American woman. Some people are linking that story to Layla. We need to refute this or confirm it. Refute it. Layla interjected, indignation flaring in her eyes. It's a smear campaign by a bitter ex. I've told David this already. David sighed. Do we have any evidence that you didn't do these things? Layla. Something official. Legal documents proving your innocence. She glowered, crossing her arms. I never faced formal charges. That's all the proof I have. Jacqueline's voice softened. That's not enough for the court of public opinion. They want something concrete. With a heavy sigh, David ended the call, promising to regroup later. He turned to face Layla, who was hugging herself defensively. I need the truth, he said quietly. I'm not accusing you, but if there's any detail you left out, I need to know. Her eyes flickered. Then she told him her story. Layla claimed she had indeed worked with Jean-Louis Moreau, one of France's most influential collectors, who hired her to help him scout and acquire valuable pieces. According to Layla, Jean-Louis was arrogant and manipulative, eventually pressuring her into a toxic affair. As she tried to distance herself professionally and personally, Jean-Louis began to sabotage her reputation, planting rumors of forgery and fraud. Layla insisted she had zero involvement in any wrongdoing and fled Europe after receiving threats from Jean-Louis' associates. She'd been attempting to rebuild her life in New York, severing all ties with that dark chapter. David listened, half wanting to believe her. The story was plausible enough. Rich men had used their influence to destroy someone's reputation before. But a nagging doubt remained. Layla was still omitting details. "What about the rumors you drugged him and stole money?" David asked, referencing a particularly sensational claim circulating online. Her cheeks reddened. Utter lies. Fabricated. "I don't do drugs. I hardly even drink. I've never stolen a cent from anyone in my life. Don't you see, he's punishing me because I left him." David studied her trembling lip, the tears welling in her eyes. He wanted to comfort her, to accept her story at face value. But the stakes were too high. His empire was in jeopardy, and if Layla was hiding something, the fallout could be catastrophic. Yet the thought of losing her, the excitement she brought into his life, filled him with dread. So he decided to proceed cautiously, choosing to believe her for the moment, but resolved to do his own thorough checks. He called in favors from private investigators he had used in corporate deals. Within hours, they began scouring European legal records, court documents, and any traces of Layla's past, all while David prepared for the next wave of media scrutiny. The scandal showed no signs of abating. Then, in a surprising twist, David's phone rang with a call from none other than Jean-Louis Moreau himself. A few months prior, David had made casual acquaintance with Moreau at a Monaco charity event. Now the French collector was reaching out directly, presumably, to discuss the fiasco. With Layla fidgeting nervously nearby, David accepted the call. On speaker, Jean-Louis' accented voice flowed smoothly. "Ah, Monsieur Harrington. I see we have a common acquaintance." David cleared his throat. "Apparently so. I'd like to get to the bottom of this. You're aware of the rumors." A condescending chuckle crackled over the speaker. "Rumors, yes. But they are not rumors, monsieur. The woman you call Layla St. James, if that's her real name, defrauded me. She introduced me to forged artwork, manipulated me emotionally, then disappeared with large commissions. I have evidence. I attempted legal action, but she slipped away." Layla blanched, shaking her head vehemently at David. David pressed. "She claims you invented these lies because she ended a personal relationship with you." A harsh laugh erupted from Jean-Louis. "Personal relationship? She seduced me for one purpose, to gain access to my network and my finances. I warn you, Harrington, this is a dangerous woman. She is skilled at deception. If you continue to involve yourself with her, your name, your empire, both will burn." The call ended abruptly. Layla broke into tears, insisting Jean-Louis was lying, that he was the manipulator. David stood there, torn. On one hand, he despised Jean-Louis's smug tone and recognized how men of power often rewrite history to blame women. On the other, the man's conviction was chilling. Could it all be true? David's private investigators would soon deliver a preliminary report, but the emotional stakes were skyrocketing. If Layla was innocent, David would stand by her. If she was guilty, he risked his fortune, his reputation, everything. And all the while, Sarah loomed in the background, her silence perhaps more threatening than any media outlet. That night, David slept fitfully plagued by dreams of forging art and forging love, unable to discern which illusions were real. Little did he know the truth would be more complicated and more shocking than he could ever anticipate. By the following morning, David's investigators had sent a cryptic message. "We have substantial findings. Meeting recommended." He arranged for them to come to the penthouse, carefully scheduling it when Layla would be out. She had departed earlier to clear her head, though David wondered if she was actually meeting someone else. Just after noon, two stoic men in suits arrived, introducing themselves as Morgan Harris and Philip Zhao. David led them into the study, shutting the door behind them. Their expressions were grim. Morgan began. "Mr. Harrington, we've identified two separate legal dockets in Paris and Brussels that involve an American woman with a similar profile to Ms. St. James. The name used was not Layla St. James, but Linda McPherson." Same initials, LM Philip continued. "The charges were dropped in one case and settled out of court in another. Both involved allegations of art fraud and misrepresentation. The documents list an unidentified male accomplice." David leaned forward, his pulse pounding. "Are we sure this is the same woman?" Morgan nodded. "We have a 78% facial recognition match between photos from archived news articles and the images you provided us of Ms. St. James. A strong likelihood it's her." A nauseating dread coursed through David's veins. "Any sign of Jean-Louis Moreau's involvement?" Philip replied. "He's mentioned in the Brussels docket as a complaining witness. The details were sealed, but we suspect a settlement was reached behind closed doors." David sank into his chair, his mind a kaleidoscope of betrayal and rage. He thought of confronting Layla, but a text on his phone interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Unknown number. "If you want to keep certain secrets from your wife and the public, it'll cost you $5 million. Wire instructions to follow." Accompanying the text was a single photograph, a candid shot of David and Layla in an intimate moment on the Belize beach, far more revealing than anything posted on social media. Clearly, someone had been photographing them. The angle suggested a drone or a long-range camera. And now they wanted money. David clenched his jaw. "I'm being blackmailed," he growled, showing Morgan and Philip the text. They exchanged worried looks, cautioning David not to make any hasty moves. This could be linked to Ms. St. James's alleged accomplice, Morgan offered. "We've seen this pattern before." Seething, David dismissed them. He needed a plan. A quiet hush money payment would only encourage more extortion down the line. Yet ignoring the threat could lead to even greater exposure. And the worst part was the growing suspicion that Layla herself might be part of this scheme, another elaborate con. But a flicker of doubt lingered. Perhaps Layla truly was a victim, and her old accomplice was extorting them both. He decided he needed to corner Layla that very evening. No more half-truths or evasion. He wanted her entire story. If she lied or faltered, he'd cut her off and let the legal system do its worst. But if she persuaded him of her innocence, then perhaps, just perhaps, they could face this together. Hours later, Layla returned. David wasted no time. "We need to talk," he said curtly, leading her into the study. She looked apprehensive, eyes darting to the closed door. He showed her the blackmail text and the incriminating photo. He then presented the investigative report, the name Linda McPherson, the out-of-court settlements. With every piece of information, Layla's face paled further. When he finished, an uneasy silence settled. Layla's lips quivered. Then she began to speak, voice trembling. "I'm not Linda McPherson. That was my sister." A new tale spilled forth, each revelation more shocking than the last. Layla insisted she had a twin sister raised separately after a messy divorce in her childhood. The sister was the one who got entangled with Jean-Louis, forging art and leveraging Layla's identity. Layla claimed she tried to help her sister out of the mess, but it spiraled beyond control. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I fled to America to escape that chaos. My sister threatened to drag me down with her. I changed my name legally to distance myself from her record. David, I swear I've never defrauded anyone. I thought you'd never understand, so I kept it hidden. David's mind reeled. The idea of a twin, a doppelganger who could have orchestrated these crimes, sounded outrageous, but not impossible. Layla sobbed, claiming her sister was the blackmailer, the one who had been snapping secret photos and demanding money. She's punishing me for leaving her behind, for not bailing her out again. The story was so elaborate, so twisted. David's gut wrenched with conflicting emotions. The puzzle pieces fit a little too well, yet Layla's tears seemed genuine. He remembered how she had always been vague about her family, how frightened she seemed whenever he asked about her past. Could this all be real? Wrestling with his doubts, David found himself making a decision based on a precarious blend of logic and emotion. If what you're saying is true, we need proof, he said, voice stern. We'll involve my investigators. We'll find your sister, and we'll end this blackmail. Layla nodded, relieved. Whatever it takes. I'll do anything. A fragile truce formed between them that night. David, driven by a potent mix of fear, pride, and infatuation, chose to believe Layla at least temporarily. He vowed to protect her from the blackmailer, from the swirling rumors, from everything. Yet in the darkness of the penthouse, as Layla slept fitfully in the next room, David stared out the window at the glowing city lights, wondering if he'd just made the greatest mistake of his life. While David grappled with the twin sister revelation, Sarah conducted her own inquiry, determined to uncover the truth about Layla St. James. Through her legal network, she managed to contact a renowned French attorney named René Fournier, who had once handled a high-profile art fraud case involving Jean-Louis Moreau. Via a series of lengthy email exchanges, Sarah pieced together a confounding puzzle. According to René, there had indeed been an American woman at the center of the Moreau scandal. Someone who used multiple aliases, among them Linda and Layla. Official documents were sealed, but rumors suggested the woman had an accomplice, possibly a family member. René also hinted that the entire fiasco nearly extended into a broader European crime syndicate. But before any formal charges could stick, the woman vanished. Moreau had enough influence to keep the scandal out of mainstream news, presumably to save face. But the rumor mill churned relentlessly behind closed doors. Sarah's instincts told her that David's mistress had some connection to that case, but she wanted concrete proof. She scrolled through obscure websites, reading half-legible Google translations of French tabloids, looking for any mention of sisters or twins. Then she stumbled on a small blog post from years ago that mentioned a sibling duo suspected of art forgery, one rumored to be involved with Moreau. The post cited no official documents, but the narrative was eerily similar to Layla's story. Frustrated, yet fueled by this partial validation, Sarah pressed further. She reached out to an old law school acquaintance in Brussels, who was now a mid-level judicial clerk. Within a day, the acquaintance confirmed that sealed records existed involving a Linda McPherson, but he couldn't access details without risking his career. He did, however, confirm the mention of a sister in the sealed complaint. Sarah found herself at a crossroads. Layla might indeed have a twin, a partner in crime, or a separate individual entirely. Either possibility spelled trouble for David, and by extension, Sarah. If Layla had roped David into a blackmail scheme, the scandal could destroy his reputation and the philanthropic work Sarah herself cherished. The final piece of the puzzle arrived in an even more unexpected way. Late one afternoon, Sarah received a cryptic text from a number labeled Unknown. Meet me at the Green Leaf Cafe on 5th. I have information about Layla. Come alone. A friend. Wary of a trap, Sarah nearly ignored it, but curiosity and a desire to protect herself compelled her to go. She arrived at the cafe, a cozy, dimly lit space, scanning the patrons nervously. A tall, lean man in a baseball cap stood and waved her over. As she approached, he took off the cap, revealing salt and pepper hair. She recognized him vaguely from a magazine cover, Jean-Louis Moreau. Her heart hammered as she sat down, unsure how to proceed. Moreau spoke first, his English tinged with a delicate accent. Mrs. Harrington, thank you for coming. I apologize for the clandestine approach, but we share a common predicament. She regarded him with cold caution. You claim to have information about Layla St. James. His lips curled into a faint smile. Or Linda McPherson, or whatever she calls herself these days. Sarah's breath caught. So it's true. Moreau leaned in. I contacted your husband, but he seems enamored by her. Or perhaps she's convinced him of a sob story. Either way, he is not receptive. But you, Mrs. Harrington, you have more at stake if this escalates further. He slid an envelope across the table. Sarah opened it to find printed emails, photographs, documents linking Layla to a series of art deals with suspicious authenticity. One photo showed a woman identical to Layla holding hands with a second woman, a near doppelganger. Another picture captured them in front of a Belgian art gallery, rumored to deal in forgeries. The timestamps suggested these were from a few years ago. Proof of her partnership with her twin, who is equally cunning. Moreau explained. They swindled me and they swindled others. I want them both to face justice. But your husband is in the way, blindly protecting her. Sarah felt a swirl of conflicting emotions, bitterness, heartbreak, and a strange sense of vindication. Part of her wanted to lash out at David. Part of her wanted to pity him. She also wondered what Moreau expected from her. Moreau eyed her. I need your help. Influence your husband to break ties with her. If he continues to shield her, she will only drag him further into the mud. And I suspect her sister lurks in the shadows, planning something bigger. Perhaps the blackmail we are hearing about Sarah, swallowed hard. What do you get out of this? His brow furrowed. Closure, justice, and the chance to salvage what's left of my reputation in Europe. Also a certain moral satisfaction in knowing these sisters don't dupe anyone else. They parted ways with a tense handshake. Sarah clutched the envelope as if it were a time bomb. Her marriage had been on the brink of collapse, but this new knowledge gave her a sense of responsibility. She had to warn David, if only to protect him from sinking deeper into a catastrophic scandal. She also felt a measure of compassion. Despite his betrayal, David was still the man she once loved, and no matter how furious she felt, she didn't want him ruined by these manipulations. That night she found herself driving to David's penthouse, not entirely sure how she would approach the subject. The envelope of evidence sat on the passenger seat like a loaded gun. She thought of all the ways this meeting could go. Would David believe her? Would Layla be there spitting venom at Sarah's intrusion? One thing was certain: the next steps she took could determine the fate of both their futures and possibly save David from the greatest betrayal of his life. Sarah arrived at David's penthouse just after dusk, her nerves taut with urgency. The doorman let her in, without question. As she stepped off the private elevator, she found David pacing the living room phone clutched in hand. He froze when he saw her guilt, relief, and dread flashing across his face. "Sarah," he began. She raised a hand. "I know everything. I'm here to stop you from making a terrible mistake." Without another word, she extended the envelope Jean-Louis Moreau had given her. David took it, flipped through its contents, photographs of Layla and her twin emails detailing suspicious art deals and banking documents that hinted at blackmail. His face tightened with disbelief. "Where did this come from?" he asked quietly. "From Moreau," Sarah said. "He claims Layla and her sister ran a sophisticated art scam, and now she's entangled you in it." David looked stunned. "Layla told me her sister set her up, that she's the victim here." "She also told you she'd be honest with investigators," Sarah countered. "Did she ever show you this?" She pointed to a photo of Layla and her sister, exchanging a thick envelope, both smiling. Before David could reply, Layla stepped out of a side room. Her hair was tousled, her eyes burning. "You're working with that man, Sarah. That manipulative monster." Sarah didn't flinch. "You've been hiding too much. If you're innocent, prove it. I was trying to protect David." Layla cried. "My sister threatened us both. I didn't plan to fall in love, but I did." Everything changed. Before David could react, Layla's phone buzzed. She paled, then bolted toward her bag. Her belongings spilled across the floor, lipstick's wallet and a folded note. Sarah snatched it up. "Swiss wire transfer instructions," she read aloud. "Is this your sister's next payment?" Layla's defenses crumbled. "I was going to handle it. I didn't want David dragged through this." "So you'd rather pay hush money than tell the truth?" Sarah's voice was tight with disgust. David stared at Layla, torn between fury and heartbreak. "You told me we were into this together, but you lied again. I had to." Layla shouted, tears streaming. "I knew if you doubted me, you'd walk away." David's face hardened. "And now I just might." The room fell into tense silence. Then quietly, David picked up his phone. "I'm calling the police," he said, dialing. "Let them figure out who's lying." Layla lunged for the phone, but Sarah stepped in her way. A moment later, the call connected. The decision was made. Sirens approached in the distance. Layla collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. Sarah turned away, fighting back tears of her own, of betrayal, loss, and something like pity. The truth would unravel in the days to come. Investigators would trace the blackmail, expose the twins' identity, and sort through Layla's involvement. David's public image would take a hit, but it would survive. Whether his marriage did only time would tell. But for now, the storm outside mirrored the one within, and none of their lives would ever be the same. Betrayal, scandal, and secret identities. This story proves that even the most powerful among us can be undone by hidden truths. In the end, David Harrington learned the hard way that wealth and influence can't shield you from the consequences of deception. Sarah, despite her heartbreak, found renewed strength in confronting the lies head-on rather than remaining a silent victim. As for Layla or Linda, her fate was sealed by the very illusions she spun, reminding us that the truth always finds a way to surface.